Welcome to Philanthropy SA. This is a podcast about and for the philanthropic community in San Antonio and South Texas. We introduce organizations and people who are making an impact in the community. Beneficent Financial is proud to sponsor this podcast, and it is our hope that you enjoy this conversation about the impact we can have. The goal is to edify and inspire. Now please join our host, Dan Rebmann.
Well, thank you and welcome to Philanthropy SA. I'm really glad to be joined by Caton. He is somebody I've ran into at multiple events through multiple organizations. So I know he is doing a ton of great stuff, not just here in San Antonio, but all around the world, literally around the world. And so, Carl, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So what we want to do is just kind of hear a little bit about you. How did you get to be involved? And in addition to other stuff, he's the executive director at Marriage Initiative.
Right.
So want to find out how you got into that, and kind of what led you here to San Antonio and South Texas and doing all this good.
Well, thank you. I grew up out in West Texas, and it was an interesting early life. I grew up in a farm and ranch community, also a refining community. We had a big refinery, and it was an interesting town to grow up in. There was hard work, was the emphasis, a lot of risk taking, as you can imagine, with dry land farming. But it was a very interesting town to grow up in. And but my mom and dad obviously had a huge influence on me. My mom was a really interesting person. And she influenced me at a very early age with this idea of investing. She was a Baylor graduate and a valedictorian. She was a smart lady and thought a lot about business. And she raised me to kind of think about investing and how investing is important, and especially investing for impact. But I also grew up in a really neat church. It was a mainline denominational church, and it was a church filled with visionaries. People had big ideas. In fact, the inventor of plastic, if you open your refrigerator door and you see the white plastic, that was invented in my little small town. And these great visionary leaders, had a big vision for the city. So it was a very interesting place to grow up. But Kelly and I moved to San Antonio in 1986. I was in the real estate business, and we fell in love with the city. We fell in love with what God was doing in the city, and so it was a great early start here.
Outstanding. Well, we're glad you came, for sure. So talk to me about how you got involved with the Marriage Initiative, or how did that become a cause so near and dear to your heart?
Well, I appreciate that question. Kelly and I are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, so
congratulations.
We've been on a really fun journey, but really early in our marriage, 5 couples in our life divorced. 2 of our close family members and our 3 closest friends from church. And it was a very confusing time. I was in the real estate business. We didn't know how to help couples, so we had lonely people over to our house for dinner on a Sunday night, and that's the only way that we knew to help couples. But as we began to help couples, more and more couples came to our door. It didn't make sense to me, but God began to show us that there were all sorts of really amazing resources that were very transformative in a lot of these marriages. So it gave us kind of this unique early understanding of the importance of investing in your marriage, and so that is kind of what piqued our interest. And so I love the institution of marriage. I love serving marriages, but more than anything, Dan, I like being married. Marriage is this amazing institution, where I talk about the 3 C's, the 3 C's of companionship, connection, and commitment. Marriage is the most amazing form of companionship that we have, and that we have this daily friend on a daily journey. And I think Kelly and I, more than anything, have an incredible friendship that's based on. But there's also this unique connection that we have as a couple, a connection that's emotional, it's spiritual, can also be so uniquely physical, really powerful. And also marriage is the most significant commitment we make to another human being this side of heaven, right? And so marriage is really amazing. And as Tim Keller says, outside of our relationship with God, marriage is the most profound relationship there is. And we say that, and yet we know that so many couples are struggling. Because in San Antonio, The census data tells us there's 400,000 marriages, and research indicates that 20% of those marriages are struggling. That means we have 80,000 struggling marriages in San Antonio.
Wow.
And divorce filings indicate that 9,000 couples will file for divorce this year. So it's a massive and overwhelming problem. But marriage is more than just a romantic notion. It's the family leadership team. And as goes the marriage, so goes the family.
Yeah. It almost sounds like there's a fourth C you could add in there, which is challenges. And
yeah. And I've also heard covenant. So there's a lot of C's.
Covenant's a more powerful one.
It is.
A better one than challenges. So talk about, sometimes it's easy to say that, when a marriage goes, has trouble and ends and that type of thing, that it's like, sad for the people involved, but I think you've got research that shows it goes well beyond that immediate household. Is that right?
Yeah, there's kind of a cascading impact of the breakdown of marriage, and so we like to say that if a marriage fails, or if it fails to form, because either way, whenever there's children being raised in a home where there's not an intact family, where there's a mom and dad present in the home, those kids are at an elevated risk, not always, but at an elevated risk for negative things to happen in their life. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to fall behind in school. They're more likely to enter into risky behaviors. They say that where there's a lack of father presence in a home, those boys are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated. And there's this cascading series of impacts. Again, not in every family, but it is an elevated risk for families when there's not this intact leadership team. We want to emphasize that so much. Marriage is the central bond. It's the central bond of every family. It's more than just a romantic notion. Marriage, a husband and wife, are the family leadership team. And if you took this same concept to any sports analogy and you said, what would it look like if the Dallas Cowboys had their leadership team or coaching split and went into different camps and play different plays, would that team win? No, that team would never win. And the same thing goes for a family. A family can win, but it's much more difficult for a family to win when that leadership team is not intact.
Sure. No, that only makes sense. And as a society, we all feel the impact of when those things happen, whether it's through, things like higher incarceration levels, which is obviously something that society is paying attention to and that type of thing, or just the fact that people are growing up in a way that's not, the most healthy for them in terms of making good choices and in doing those kinds of things. And
that's absolutely right. Let's be clear on something. We talk in our society, we talk in the political realms, we talk about social problems. We talk a lot about social problems. But let's be clear, social problems are really family problems. Poverty, incarceration, teenage pregnancy, these are family problems. These are the outcomes of the breakdown of family. And there's been some incredible research called the success sequence. And this is what's so interesting about the success sequence. If young people will do 4 things in this order, okay, and that is if a young person will graduate high school, if they will get a job, if they will get married, and if they will have children, if they'll do those 4 things, the likelihood of them falling into poverty is 3%. You get any one of those out of order, and it goes up tenfold, okay? And so there is an order for things. God created marriage. He created family to create a sense of order. And when we go out of order, when we get out of order, then things can change dramatically.
Yeah, and that sequencing sounds, to a lot of us just like common sense, right? But for a lot of people, they may be the first person in their family doing it in that sequence.
Right.
They may not be. That might not be something that was held up as a model that is, one to follow.
Right.
And that type of thing. So let's talk a little bit about we talked about the social impact and that kind of thing. And obviously you come at this, I know you to be a man of great faith and that's important to you, but this is an issue that transcends that component of it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you speak a little bit about just the nature of the research that's involved here, and that folks, this is an issue that touches us all regardless of where we're coming at from a faith background?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the breakdown of the family, it really a lot of times creates cascading impacts that turns into what we call social problems. And when we think about it from this perspective of investing, one of the things that we know is that in communities, it costs very little to keep a marriage together. We think about $200 is what it costs to keep a marriage intact, a marriage that's in a difficult place. We think it costs about $200 to keep a marriage intact. But if a marriage breaks or if it fails to form, then the cascading impacts get more and more expensive. If kids fall behind in school, we know it's roughly $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000. A teenage pregnancy typically costs our society $25,000 to $50,000. If kids enter in risky behavior, then it can cost $75,000 to $100,000. Juvenile incarceration in Texas costs us $180,000 a year. In fact, the taxpayer cost of divorce in Texas is $38,000 per family, which means in San Antonio, we have a $300 million a year problem that nobody's talking about.
Wow.
But the most significant, the most heart-wrenching, and the most expensive thing that we have to deal with in culture is sex-trafficked children. And we don't yet know what it costs to rehabilitate a child that has compound traumas. I've heard estimates of around $500,000 per child. Well, this is where it gets into your world, Dan, in the world of investing, okay? Because for the cost of what it requires to rehabilitate one sex-trafficked child, you could actually prevent 2,000 marriages from breaking.
Oh, my.
And this is the world. I'm going to get out of our Christian world for a minute, because a lot of the best thinking is not happening inside the church, and it's not happening inside of the world of Christianity. It's happening in the secular world. And some of the best thinking is in this area is what's called effective altruism. And effective altruism is this idea that we should care about things with our heart, but we should also think about things with our head. And we should begin to think about things. And let me give an example of what people talk about with effective altruism. For instance, this is one of the problems they pose. They say, for the cost of training one guide dog for a blind person in the United States, you can do blindness recovery surgery for 400 people in other countries. So this is a philosophical question. Where should we invest? But we know that investing in the upstream of the breakdown of the family is the most efficient and effective way to invest our money. It's not that we can't not invest in the downstream. It's that we need to not only care with our heart but think with our head. Because if we don't start thinking with our head, we're never going to change the trajectory and the destiny of so many families.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And when you use words like investing, so I know that for you is along the lines of giving. And so, and you, I believe, had, a time in your life where you kind of looked at giving and investing and those types of things in a different light.
Yeah, absolutely. About 25 years ago, a friend of mine got involved in what's called the generous giving movement. It was something that was really ignited by this author, Randy Alcorn. He wrote The Treasure Principle, and Randy began to advance these ideas of stewardship. And that really resonated with me. And what was so fascinating is the friends that I saw that were getting involved in this generous giving movement, they were just tithing. Some of these men were committing 50% of their annual income. There were a few guys that were committing 90% of their annual income. Can you imagine giving 90% of your annual income? But God was just blessing them and overflowing them. And I saw the faithfulness of God at work in their life, and it caused me to kind of rethink, that number one is that, nothing belongs to us. We're stewards, and our job is stewardship. And we come into this world without anything, and we leave without anything. And so our job while we're here is stewardship, managing what God has given us, managing it well. And so when you think about how do you manage what God's given you, you want to use what you have for the advancement of the kingdom of God. You want to invest in ways that get impact. And so it's about ROI. What's the return on investment? You look at everything that you invest in. Like, for instance, Kelly and I love to give towards water in communities in other parts of the world, and they say it costs $1 to provide clean drinking water for one person for 10 years. That's a high ROI investment. So we always think about ROI and the return on investment of how we invest God's resources. And what we've seen is God has continued to bless us in surprising ways because we just focus on how we can invest what He's given us.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're going to take a quick minute and hear from our sponsor, and then we'll pick right back up with Carl.
Many of you out there care deeply about wanting to make an impact on the world around you. You want to help take care of the people and organizations that are important to you. We understand that because we feel the same way. Beneficent Financial wants to help you. Our mission is to help people like you with professional, individualized financial advice achieve their objectives. Whether your financial legacy will stay within your family or benefit the community at large, we are able to help. Call Beneficent Financial today at 210-999-5511. In addition to traditional wealth management, we offer philanthropic services such as direct donations of required minimum distributions, donor-advised funds, and foundations. Call 210-999-5511 or go online to beneficentfinancial.net. Let us help you do well so you can do good. Securities offered through Momentum Independent Network, member SIPC/FINRA.
Welcome back. Carl, thanks for being here again. Before we broke there a moment ago, we were talking about investment, and we were talking about investment from the form of giving, and that type of thing. And that's something near and dear to my heart, as you know, that we look at it that way. But talk to me about, I think a lot of people, when they say they're going to give to an organization, no matter how worthy and that type of thing, they don't necessarily view it within the context of investing. Mm-hmm. Help them kind of get an idea of what you mean by investing. And I think, when you're talking about return on investment and that type of thing, where the way that works, like within the marriage initiative and within your space.
Well, when we think about how we give, a lot of times some of our responses are proactive and some of them are reactive. And I think for a lot of people, it's reactive. They go about their daily life, and when they're asked, to give to something, they might respond to that positively or negatively. But I think to properly have a mind of stewardship is to be proactive. And to say, first of all, where's God calling us to give? What is the story of how God has been at work in our lives? And understanding that and understanding our personal calling, then where should we invest? To be proactive in thinking about those investments. And then secondly is just to decide, where's God leading us to give? Specifically, I think it always begins in the church. We should always begin. Our first giving always begins in the church, and we should always begin with tithing in our church. But we're called to give beyond the tithe. And that's where things get really exciting. It's like, where else are we going to give? And so, we're not a wealthy family, and so we need to invest in ways that get high impact and get a good return on investment. And so we began to kind of think strategically about where we can get some of that best return on investment, and that's why we ended up in the upstream of the breakdown of families. We don't have enough money to create any substantial change if we're personally investing in the downstream.
Sure.
And all the money in the world will not make a difference if we wait until people and families and children are at their absolute worst moment. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't meet them there. We must. But as great thinkers in this world think, we must diversify our grant making, which means Certainly we need to help people when they're at their worst possible moment. But we also need to diversify some of our giving and move to the more into the upstream. How can we begin to prevent problems from happening? For instance, in the marriage space, if a young couple that's engaged and being ready to be married, if they'll take 8 hours of marriage preparation, their likelihood of success in marriage goes from 50 to 92%.
Wow.
That's massive. That's a massive change. And if we had time to unpack why that is, it would make sense to you. That's a great place to invest, is helping, and that's one of our emphasis in the Marriage Initiative, is help young people get a better start in starting marriage well. And because think of what the taxpayer cost savings on that would be. And the taxpayer savings is the least likely or least important reason to do these things. More important, we do this because of the impact it has on children.
Sure. And as you're going through all this, I know that your team there at the Marriage Initiative is maybe a little unique, or your structures may be a little different than some organizations. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about marriage, people think we're counselors. We're not. We train champions. And so 2/3 or 65% of our mission with the Marriage Initiative is beyond San Antonio. We have 4 major components of our work. One is the Marriage Leaders Network. This is where we work with these amazing authors and speakers from around the country who are creating best-in-class resources for marriages, who are seeing their resources being transformative in the lives of families. Our second major component is what we call Community Marriage Initiative, and that's where we're working with 89 leaders in 16 cities to help them start marriage initiatives in their own cities. And just recently, we took the leadership of National Marriage Week, which is February 7th through 14th every year, where around the country, in fact, around the world, as part of International Marriage Week, we celebrate the importance and value of marriage and encourage couples to invest in their marriage and to go on to date nights and do fun things in their marriage. National Marriage Week has been a lot of fun. And the fourth component is the Marriage Resource Center, where we are intending to build the largest resource center online for marriages really anywhere in the country. And it will showcase 300 of the best-in-class marriage resource creators who collectively create over 1,000 resources for marriage. And all of these pieces fit strategically together. And so we, more than anything, we unite and we help train dynamic marriage leaders around the country who want to impact their communities for marriage.
That's incredible. And to think all that's just here in little old South Texas and San Antonio. So that's awesome. I know that, so you mentioned your professional background in terms of real estate and that type of thing. And you've obviously, dedicating a huge amount of time to the Marriage Initiative and everything that's going on there. I know that's been a bit of a walk for you as well in terms of how you balance those. So kind of talk to us a little bit about how you balanced that, professional life and what you're doing there with, the impact that you're having through the Marriage Initiative.
Well, I was very blessed as a young man to have a lot of smart people around me and a lot of people that gave me guidance. And I always had a real reverence for people's wisdom. And even beginning as a college student, I would be always looking for men and women that were 10 years or 20 years further down the road. And I would always be intentional to reach out to them. And when I was 25, I would say, what's it like to be 35? And what are you working with? What should I know about what it's like to be 35? Or I'd meet with a man who was 45 and say, what should I look like? And I'll never forget this man named Clyde Cox who became a mentor to me. He was 25 years older than me. And he gave me some incredible wisdom when I was in my 30s. And he said this. He said, Carl, don't wait until you retire to begin to shift to your legacy season. Because there's really 3 seasons of a man's life, and that's adventure, mastery, and legacy. Adventure is when we're young and we want to do all these crazy things, and mastery is where we want to, scale our vocation and our profession, and then legacy is when we begin thinking beyond. And Clyde told me, he said, son, be thinking about what you want your legacy to be earlier in your life. And so in my early 40s, I decided that I would go on a 20-year track to become more and more bivocational every year. I wasn't going to make a significant, crazy, radical change at age 42. I had a family, and my kids were young, but developed this idea that every year I would shift 5% more of my time over 20 years to ministry. And so in the very beginning I was only spending 5%, and then a year later 10%, and slowly over 20 years I became fully in a ministry vocation. Mm-hmm. And that just actually became 100% this past November.
Congratulations.
Where I left the real estate business and became full-time in the nonprofit and family strengthening space.
Very good. And in the course of doing that, what happened as you hit maybe a hiccup professionally or something like that? Was there a temptation to say, oh, you know what, I need to stay at this level for a while, or maybe even take a step back and say, I need to pour a little bit more into the business side?
It's well, first of all, in full transparency, there was a lot of moments where I thought, this is crazy. I thought, I don't know how this is going to work, and this sounds really crazy. But I took a slow and steady approach, and I had to say I didn't know how God would work through this. But I did know He would show up. I didn't know what our outcomes would be. And so we just took each step each year to get closer and closer to this. And what was so fun about that, Dan, is God showed up in amazing ways, and ways that I had no idea. Look, I never planned to be in the marriage space or marriage initiative space. I never dreamed this was the space we'd be in. And yet here we are, and we're impacting leaders in cities, all around the country. And it's been such an exciting journey. It's like going on a daily treasure hunt where every day we're saying, God, you've got to show up today. You've got to do something in a way that will help us move forward. And so it's been a really fun journey.
Absolutely. So how can people who are interested come alongside you and help in this? What can people who are listening to this and say, I've been moved in a way that I want to come alongside and help these folks?
Well, let's talk about the full spectrum. So first of all, invest in your own marriage. Be intentional about how you grow in your marriage. There's so many resources. In fact, we give our community almost 200 resources a year. And half of those are live events in San Antonio. If you want to grow in your marriage, there's so many ways that you can do that. So invest in your own marriage. Secondly, invest in the couples around you. Have you ever thought about being a mentor? Or maybe just to a friend to a young couple that's engaged and want to be married. So think about the marriages around you. Thirdly would be, if you're really passionate about marriage, what would it look like if you started a marriage ministry in your own church? We have a huge support system for couples that want to lead marriage ministry in their own church. Maybe you've done really well in the business world or financial world somehow, and you really want to invest in a high ROI ministry, then we always invite people to be a part of this financially. But for everyone, we say, please pray for this ministry and for this work. The enemy has, look, Dan, you would agree with me, the enemy has had his way in marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Marriage has been under attack for decades. And the enemy has had his way, and families have been destroyed. And the only way we're really ever going to turn this around is if God chooses to move in this, and He is, and if we call on Him through the power of prayer, and especially collectively through the power of prayer, to show up and to redeem and restore. And we believe that's true. We say we believe God desires to redeem and restore marriages in San Antonio by His power and for His glory. And the thing that I love about that is that it doesn't say anything about our organization or me or us. It's just we're pointing to the fact that God hasn't given up on marriage. Let's remind ourselves, marriage was God's first institution. And it was a long time coming before He created His second institution, the church. And the church has sadly forgotten about marriage in some ways. Mm-hmm. And so we're calling the church back to His first institution. Let's invest in marriages. Let's use the power of the kingdom of God to redeem and restore marriages.
Amen. I just want to thank Carl for being here today. I just think that this is a topic that we can spend a lot more time on, and I want to encourage anybody who's looking for a way to make a positive difference in this space to do those things. Work on your own marriage, help other people, and then feel free to reach out to the Marriage Initiative and do that. Do you have a website that you want to direct people to?
Yeah, samarriage.org.
samarriage.org. That's a good one and easy to remember. So thank you for joining us today. We were very glad to have Carl Caton from the San Antonio Marriage Initiative here. And when you hear about Marriage Week next February from the 7th to the 14th, make sure that you do something intentional that week and come alongside and work on that. So glad everybody was able to join us today. And on behalf of Philanthropy SA, this is Dan Rebmann saying thank you.
Thank you for joining us at Philanthropy SA. We hope you found something to inspire you during today's conversation. If you know organizations and people who are making an impact in the community, we would love to hear about it. Until next time, do well so you can do good.